Well, we finished up the back axle on this undercarriage for a 8-passenger Yellowstone Park stagecoach. I'd like to spend some time on the front axle. Remember, there are saddles on the back axle and on this front bar here as well that contain the leather throw braces, which is the leather straps for the suspension for the body of this stagecoach. So the back axle, they had blocks underneath them so that they elevated them about an inch off of the rear axle cap. This front one here, however, has been kind of recessed down into this bar, and so that's what I need to do as well on this new bar. So the width of these saddles are 37.5. I have some other old ones that I have restored that are actually 38. But this one seems to be 37.5, so that's what we'll do with this one as well. Just notch this down about 1/4 of an inch to receive this saddle. There's not a lot of shoulder here, so I'd like to keep from splitting that out. So I'm going to leave these just a hair strong, what someone would call proud. So when I put the clip on them, it'll actually maybe have some downward pressure on this saddle itself. Well, this is one of those times that there's something wrong. And do I just fix it and not show you, or do I show you and explain what's happening? It's just one of these little details, but I've decided that I'm gonna show you because I get asked this question semi-repeatedly. And that question is, when you start out with all the wood that is so decayed, how do you get an accurate measurement? And I try to explain that the wood will shrink with decay and age, but the iron stays constant. So you use your iron as a measurement for what the wood is. And that's what's happening here. If I can show you up underneath on these nuts, I hope you can see that the bolts don't come clear through the end of the nuts. See how they're recessed up there just a little bit? Well, it's because this wood is too thick. And you can see evidence of this being off because there is distance between this iron and the bottom of the reach by about a strong an eighth anyway. So this iron needs to come up, and in order for that to come up, this thickness here has to be an eighth of an inch shorter. So this angles up, coming out toward the end. I just need to bring maybe another eighth of an inch angle up here. That will allow this iron to come up, make contact against the reach, and it'll give me my extra eighth inch that'll bring the end of these bolts to where I have a full nut contact on these clips. So on the right side, you can see I've got one bolt that's coming out just flush, and the other one is recessed so it's a little short. So if I put my light here, you can see we're just starting to touch on the corner, but we have an eighth inch gap here. So I need to do the same on this right side. So since I'm not bolted through the reaches here yet, it's easy enough to take off and do that fix. Pull these clips, I'll just trim these down an eighth inch and put it back together. But I thought this was a good example to where we can use our iron as our gauge, because the iron doesn't change. The wood is going to change in thickness and sizes over age and deterioration. Now, if this bottom support iron was up tight against the reaches, well, then I'd say the top of this bar is too tall. But since there's a space underneath, then the bottom needs to come up, so I need to adjust the bottom. Now, granted, this I made off of a Coach pattern maybe 30 years ago. But our iron tells me that generally overall this is the same running gear because everything is so close. This is just one case where I need to make an eighth inch adjustment to make these work a little better and give a full thread on the bolts on these clips. So now reconnected, you can see I've got bolts extending past the nut, so I have full contact there. We got good tension there. Then on the left side, we're not quite as far extended as on the right side, but at least we're past flush, so we have a full thread on the left side as well. And we're much tighter on this bottom iron. So we're looking much better. Well, this bolt here comes up through this bridge iron that holds the thoroughbrace bar and bolts this whole assembly together. Then just ahead of this thoroughbrace bar is the fifth wheel, what we call the head block, and I had bolted it temporarily to the reaches here, but I withdrew those bolts because it has to be braced underneath. So this is the bridge that supports the thoroughbrace bar. This is the fifth wheel. Well, there is a brace that goes back to the reach that comes to this fifth wheel plate and the head block. And so that's what I need now to bolt in place, because I couldn't get to this bolt once this brace is in place. So now when the team is pulling on the front axle, pulls this whole fifth wheel assembly, this braces it back to the reach to give that strength. Well, these would have taken a 3.5-inch bolt, but I was out of 3.5, so I used a 4-inch. I have to trim all these off anyway. So right in the center of this bar that carries the thorough braces, you can see that I've drilled another hole, and this bar sets right behind the fifth wheel, but it bolts on a piece underneath that correlates with the fifth wheel on the front axle. So this is that piece that goes underneath the center reach, and it mounts up under like so. Has a heavy iron plate and then this wood block, and for whatever reason they're all kind of notched out like so with this sweeping curve. Not quite sure what that purpose is, but they're all that way. And this is notched out to accommodate the brace on the thorough brace bar, but it goes underneath like so. Well, I was sandblasting this, and it's interesting to see how they welded on a piece here. And I've noticed this on a number of coaches that I've done, but you can see a layer here. Perhaps this is where the seam shows up a little more so. This one they've dressed off pretty nicely, but this is a piece of carbon steel that has been welded onto this plate as a wear plate. And a number of these that I've taken off, you can see that they've used files, perhaps a horseshoe file or a mill file or something, and welded onto this soft iron plate so that they have a high carbon plate that will take the wear of the fifth wheel stabilizer bar as it rubs against this. You can see this is where it wears on this bar here. So I did make a replacement for this one here. I possibly could have reused it, but in the process of dismantling it, not only is it pretty weathered, but I have a chip that broke out of it, so I just chose to replace it. And it's going to get bolted on about like so underneath this center reach. Before I do that quick, I'm going to prime this. So this is how the sway bar support is going to go. And on the leading edge of that, there is this piece of iron here that also gets bolted to the very end. And it goes all the way up through that bar that holds the thorough braces. So it's going to be bolted about like so. And this is what's called the devil's tongue. And it's going to fit up underneath this center reach. This is one of those times it's hard to show you when I'm working upside down. It's going to set just about like so. So as you're looking at it from the top, this is what it looks like. So just behind this tongue, there's a second hole that needs to get bolted as well. And because of the curvature of this tongue, I have to slide it out of the way to the side to where I can get a drill up in through there. And then the very end of that bar gets bolted up as well. So, what in the world is the devil's tongue? It has to do with the kingpin and the fifth wheel assembly. You remember a couple weeks ago I put this fifth wheel iron in front of this thorough brace bar. We installed that several weeks ago, so you're all familiar with that. I haven't bored that out yet, but the kingpin goes down here and then through the head block and through the fifth wheel. And then this is the front axle that I haven't disassembled yet, but this is the bottom plate of the fifth wheel. and this is the donut that goes up into the top plate of the fifth wheel. Well, on the back of the axle cap for the front axle is this 5/8 round ring, and the devil's tongue fits right down into this area here. And so the idea is, if this kingpin was ever to break, and since they were running on rough country, if this donut came out and the two plates of the fifth wheel separated, the tendency would be to pull this axle away from the stagecoach and you'd be in for a whale of a wreck. The devil's tongue is meant to catch this as a backup to keep that wreck from happening. So that 5/8 ring is going to come right around here and encircle this tongue. So I was curious, kind of like we all are, and we hop on the internet and start to do some searches, and I was curious what would show up if I just typed in devil's tongue. Well, nothing to do with carriages, obviously, first response, so I typed in devil's tongue buggies, devil's tongue stagecoaches, and nothing came up. It's not a term that Google is familiar with yet, and if you're not in the wheelwright wagon trade, you're probably not familiar with it as well. But this is kind of the theory behind why this second tongue, called the devil's tongue, is put in behind this fifth wheel and why it's there. When we do get to that point where all this is painted and finished and the fifth wheel is assembled, you'll notice that I'll put on a leather strap. It's tacked to this bar for the throw braces. Then it comes over and it's split into two ears and pinned on both sides here to keep that fifth wheel pin from sliding up. So the devil's tongue is not the only safety feature. Along with the cover over the kingpin, there is a heavy leather strap that is figure eight tied around the whole front axle assembly as a safety feature as well. Accidents happen, and we know from the records that accidents did happen because there were a number of times of entries in those Isabel Hayne records that new bodies were ordered. It just happens. Well, another aspect of the front of this undercarriage is mounting this heavy brake rod assembly. And I know it fits right in this area here, and there's some wood blocks that this sets up on. But in order to find that height, I think I'm going to actually start in the back and put the brake bar and the push rods up, because they have to come up between this area here, and that'll help me determine the height for this bar. So this is what I have left of the whole main brake bar. There was one brake block that was left. These are the two push rods, what was left, and the ironwork that this whole assembly slides in. This main brake beam, we're at 4.5 inches deep. We're 2 1/4 inches thick, and we should be about 6 feet long. Yep, right at 72 inches for 6 feet. So I need one of those, and I'll need to sandblast these irons up. So it's interesting to find on these carrier irons here that this leather pad is still in place on these. Most of the time that piece is gone. But that takes the wear of this spring against this iron. This is a spring return to help the brake bar come back into its natural position. So as the driver activates this brake back against the wheels, it pushes against this spring, and then the spring automatically releases those brakes as the driver releases his foot from the brake lever. Well, we're headed in the right direction. I think there's still enough to do for maybe another video. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.